what's up, family? This is Marseille, aka the Property Pastor, here with Kingdom Legacy Builders, where our mission is to help everyday people like you and me to build a lasting legacy for their children and their children's children. So I wanted to do a quick video today about a review of my latest BRRRR deal. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about a quadplex that I actually purchased using seller financing with a balloon payment on the back end, and want to just kind of run through with you guys some of the pros and cons, what went good, what didn't go so well, and kind of what I learned throughout that process. One of my commitments here with Kingdom Legacy Builders is to share with you successes, share with you failures, share with you lessons learned, because I want you to grow through my experience, and guess what? I want to grow through yours. But before we get started, before I jump into the video, I want to ask you guys to make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you are not a subscriber to the Property Pastors channel, make sure you subscribe now. We're dropping brand new content, great content every single week to give you tips, to give you principles so that you can build your business. If you're in your first house, or if you're in your 15th or your 50th house, it doesn't really matter. There's a whole lot to be gained. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button. Hit that share button, shoot this video over to somebody who needs to hear it. And we're going to just continue to build each other up. So let's go ahead and jump into the details of this deal. So this is a deal that I actually purchased right before the pandemic started. So this was, I think, March of 2020 when I actually it was May of 2020 when I purchased this property. Now, it was a quadplex located in Hampton, Virginia, where I live. And the quadplex, for those of you who don't know, is a 4-unit small apartment building. Basically, you know, this unit, everybody has their own entry door. They pay their own utilities. Everything is separately metered. And I found this property through Deal Machine, basically driving for dollars. So I sent out a postcard. The owner, you know, received a postcard, called me back, happened to be ready to sell the property, and we put the deal together. Now, to tell you a little bit about the deal, you know, I approached it as I typically do with a off-market property. One of the first things, if the owner owns the property free and clear, is I'm going to look at seller financing. So I'm going to typically propose that. And in this instance, you know, kind of talking through with the owner, the seller of the property, he wasn't that keen on seller financing, right? He was worried about what happens if I need to foreclose. I don't really want to go through all that trouble, all that hassle. You know, he was about, I think he was actually 80 years old, right? So an 80-year-old man, and we struck up a conversation, got to know one another, actually became, you know, good friends through the process, which is very important in real estate because it's a relationship business. A relationship building, relationship building is critical to this business. So we actually built a good relationship throughout the negotiation and throughout the time. Now that's going to be key because I'm going to circle back to that when I talk about what went good with this particular deal. So in the negotiation, right, he wasn't keen on seller financing. He didn't want to hold a note for 25, 30 years. Like I mentioned, he was 80 years old, and he wasn't really interested in, you know, all of that money going towards his children and things like that. He wanted to go ahead and try to cash out. So what I did with him was I said, okay, here's what I would propose. Let's look at a seller finance deal with a balloon payment. Now, a seller finance deal with a balloon payment on the back end, basically what that means is that the seller will hold that note for some period of time, might be 3 years, might be 5, right? But at the end of it, whatever is left over, that is actually what becomes due. So as the purchaser, what I'm going to do is go get into that property, and the benefit to me is that I don't have to put out a whole lot of cash to get it. And in this situation, I was able to get into the property for only 10% down. We structured so that I had interest-only payments. And one of the issues that we ran into was that he was only willing to hold that note for 1 year. Now, that's not something that I'm very comfortable with, but recognizing where the seller was, I was willing to take that risk. This property was a fourplex. I love quads. I love fourplexes. I have another one. It was actually my first property that I purchased, and is my best performer. So I was looking forward to adding another one of those to the portfolio. Quads are not that plentiful in my market, so I wanted to go ahead and snatch it up. So I was able to lock it up with them, but we had to agree on a 1-year term. And when we did that, it was interest-only payments. So that meant that I didn't have to pay a whole lot out of pocket, but it actually incentivized my seller because he was going to make more money in the long run. So you really, when you do these things, you have to kind of look at how does your seller benefit from that, and then you start to work on that. So my particular seller, you know, I actually just incentivized him, saying, hey, look, after a year, you're going to be able to add on all these interest payments to the total profit margin. So you're actually making more money in the long run, which he was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Let's make that happen. So him holding the note for 30 years wasn't really for it, but him holding the note for 1 year, he was definitely up for doing that. Now, with this property, it was fully occupied. So all the tenants were already there. But one of the biggest two drawbacks to this property were the fact that the rents were very low. They were under market, so they were only charging $400 per unit, so $1,600 total. And then on top of it, the unit needed some work. It had some deferred maintenance. The owner had been doing all his own maintenance over the years, so what you tend to run into is things aren't necessarily of contractor quality. They're not going to necessarily be up to code and stuff like that. So I knew I was going to have some work to do when I actually purchased the property. Now, typically when you inherit tenants and you start to do changeover and you start to bring in your way of doing things, they're comfortable with the previous owner. So when we bring our systems on board, we typically lose about 50% of our tenants. So in this situation, that's exactly what happened. So I was anticipating that, and I was actually welcoming that, because basically 2 people moved out, and when they moved out, what I was able to do is essentially upgrade their apartments. So we had 2 tenants that we lost, but in the process of that, we went in and actually renovated 2 of our units. So what's that going to do for us? That's going to give us a higher appraisal value on the back end, but then on top of it, it's also going to allow us to charge more rent. So we took those 2 properties and basically put about $16,000 in them collectively. So each of them was, about eight grand a piece, give or take on average. And then we upgraded them, all throughout. If you want to see those videos, you can actually chime into those walkthroughs. I did walkthrough videos on both of those properties. So when in doing that, like I said, we got forced appreciation and we got upgraded units, and that's going to extend the usable life of the property, and it got a chance for me to put in my own tenants, people that I actually wanted. So we dropped 16 grand. And overall, when it was all said and done, our cash on cash return was about 15%. So I would consider this to be a BRRRR deal, just from the standpoint of us doing renovations. It wasn't a full renovation. We actually still have one more unit that we want to go in and do, but because I had to refinance, I've got to pull that cash back out so that I can pay off my original seller. So again, about 15% cash on cash return, which definitely meets my criteria. It's not the best deal in the world for me. I usually like them to be 20% or more, but given the current market, given the current conditions, I will take 15% cash on cash return at any day of the week so that I can add a quadplex to my portfolio. So the property has a lot of long-term potential that we can continue to raise rents, to continue to increase value over time. So let's talk about what went good with this project. I mentioned that we dropped about $16,000 in renovations and rehab. And in doing that, like I said, we got a really nice end product. We put in brand new appliances. We actually got some stainless steel in one of the units. Flooring was upgraded, bathrooms upgraded. So the usable life of the property, it's been extended, for years to come. But one of the nice parts about it, I mentioned that I only had a year to refinance this property. And that's not really enough time, usually from what I like. I like to have about 2 years. But in that year, I was able to go in and get the property fixed up, get it appraised, and it met its appraisal criteria, right? So I was able to cash out my seller and then come away with a new note on the property that now I have a cash flowing asset with not too much money out of pocket. Again, 15% cash on cash meets my criteria. So in it, right, we were able to get the refinance done after a year. Now, if you're buying something in your name, a lot of times the bank wants you to hold on to it. They want it to season for usually a year. Sometimes you can get away with 6 months, but in the commercial space, so I bought this property in my LLC. Typically, you don't have to wait quite as long. So a lot of times in the commercial space, they will kind of waive some of the seasoning requirements. So the good news is that I was able to get the property refinanced within the allotted time. Now, the great news about this is, and this is one of the best parts about this deal, and this is why relationships are so important, was that I was able to convert the seller from just a seller over to a private lender. Now, what do you mean? So what that means is when my seller cashed out, so originally I wanted him to hold my note for 30 years, which he wasn't willing to do. But because we had a whole year of building relationships, a whole year of me paying him on time, a whole year of him just seeing my character, seeing that I knew what I was doing. When it came time to refinance, I basically asked him, I said, hey, so now that you're going to get this payout, I think it was $150,000 payout, what are you going to do? You going on vacation? Just kind of lightheartedly, are you going on vacation? You're going to do this, you're going to do that. And he said, well, I really just want to do some renovations around my house. I want to fix my bathroom up, a few things like that. But that's really about it. So that is a key opportunity. So on top of that, I basically say, hey, I've got something I want to talk to you about. I have an opportunity. It's a lucrative opportunity that I always offer my friends, I offer, business partners and things like that. And that is the opportunity to become a bank. Now, what I talked to him about, I said, hey, you're going to take this big lump sum that you're going to get, right? You're going to have to pay your taxes and all that stuff for the capital gains, this, that, and the third. But on top of that, you're going to put whatever's left into the bank. And the bank's going to give you, 0.25% on that money. What would it look like if you lent that money to me and now you're making, 3% or 5%? That's phenomenal compared to what the bank's going to give you. Now, when I don't have a relationship or I'm doing a short-term type of project with private lending, a lot of times I'm up in the 8% to 10%. But I pitched that to him, and he said, well, let me get back to you. So he went and he thought about it. He said, you know what? I think that's a really good idea. So instead of me parking my money in the bank getting 0.25%, I can lend it to somebody that I trust, somebody that I know is going to, they've already got a history of making their payments on time. And now for me, I've got access to additional capital. I can go buy more deals. I can go and do more rehabs, right? And I never had to go to the bank. And that's the beautiful part about it. And that is really the icing on this cake. So the 15%, but on top of the 15%, I've now got another private lender in my portfolio. I love that. That's one of the things I love about real estate, is because when you start to deal with private lenders, you start to deal in private space, you can be so creative, right? So that was the best part about this deal that I really love. And I'm going to do another video just talking all about seller financing, talking about how do you do balloons, all that kind of stuff, so that I can teach you guys how to use that to actually scale your portfolio. It has helped me tremendously in my business. Now let's talk about what didn't go so well. Let's talk about some of the things that I wish I would have done differently. The very first mistake that I made with this property was that I did not get an appraisal when I purchased it. I kind of looked at the property tax values. They were above what we were trying to sell for, but that wasn't wise on my part, because it didn't give me confidence of what that property would appraise at when I purchased it. Now, the reason that was important was if the property appraised below what I needed to pay off my seller, then I would have had to bring cash to closing. Now, doesn't mean I didn't have the money to do it, but what that does mean is that that's money that I can't use for another deal. I can't use that money efficiently. That's now cash out of my pocket. So I could have easily just spent, the $400 or $500 when I purchased it, because I already spent the money to get the inspection. I wanted to do the diligence there, but my bonehead move was that I didn't get an appraisal. I just figured, it'll be okay. So that wasn't wise on my part. And honestly, up until I finally got the appraisal, I was nervous. I was like, okay, I hope this is, I hope we're going to appraise well. Fortunately, right now, the market is crazy. So appraisals are creeping up, fairly relatively well. And I had some good comps in my neighborhood, in my area at the time. So I appraised well above what I needed. But if the tide had been turned the other way, that means that I would have had to come up with that cash. So if I've got things spread out, then I could have been scrambling, trying to cough up that cash for appraisal. The other thing that I will say is that I didn't give myself enough time on the balloon, right? I knew that my seller didn't want to hold a balloon long. He basically said during negotiation, he said, the most that I ever want to do is about a year. Now, when a person says that, that's kind of their starting point of negotiation. So I think I probably could have got 2 years out of them. But, when you're doing these, you want to give yourself plenty of time so that way if anything goes wrong, a year is not that much time. In the course of when I was doing my appraisals here, I actually had a vacancy. Now, what that means is if I have a vacancy, that's going to impact the property's income. So if the bank's got what they call a debt service coverage ratio. So if I don't have enough income to cover the debt, then they would not have refinanced the property. So I actually had to submit for appraisal submit for refinancing with only 3 tenants out of a 4-tenant building. Now that really wasn't a problem because the debt service coverage ratio is really only usually about 1.2 to 1.3. So I was able to cover that. But at the end of the day, because I only had a year, to get all of this pulled together, then basically, it was a lot left to chance. Now, during the pandemic, that was a whole nother dynamic that came about. Banks were moving slower because of the volume of purchases. People are buying every house that exists out here right now. So my bank, it took them a long time for the refinance. So fortunately, I started early enough. But if I had given myself 2 years, that would have given me even more time. It wouldn't have been quite as stressful, and I could have gotten full occupancy and those kind of things. So I definitely recommend when you're doing a seller finance balloon, you give yourself no less than 2 years. to get the property up to speed where you want it, to get it, you know, turned around, to get it stabilized and all of that kind of stuff before you refinance and actually pay out your buyer. But overall, I'm very happy with the way this one turned out. I'm super happy about the fact that I got a property in hand, not a whole lot of cash that came out of my pocket, but I got another private lender, right? So now I have another source of OPM or other people's money that I can now use to pour into my business and continue to grow. You know, God is good, you know, and I'm just grateful for the way that this deal turned out. And I'm looking forward to even more. So wanted to just kind of give you a recap over that one, about that project, and just show you the good and the bad and the ugly and all that kind of stuff. But again, thank you guys for tuning in today. Again, if you have not subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can catch on to some of the great content that we're putting out. If you got questions, make sure you drop them in the questions section. If you got comments, things that have helped you in your business, you know, share them with us too, because we're all here to grow together. But I thank you guys for tuning into today's video. Love you much. Can't wait to see you again soon. God bless and take care.